You're not an American, you're a Palestinian. I wasn't made to feel as an American, not by my American constituents, but by my family, by my community. My perception of Americans, I saw them as people who were morally bankrupt.
What was your perception growing up of Jewish people?
It is pretty bigoted, the way I thought of Jewish people. I fit the bill of what you think of an anti-Semite. I was told about Jewish people, the way my father explained them is that they were cowards. They're pigs. The Jewish people are the enemy of Allah. And it doesn't matter what walk of Islam you live in, you're always going to have that hostile view towards the Jewish community. I had traveled to Palestine and actually lived there. So I knew going in that I wasn't going to agree with everything that I saw. I quickly realized that no, in fact, it's going to shake me to my core.
Welcome, guys. We got a very special guest here today. We have the Save Samaritan. Obviously, that's not his government name, but we have to keep things very private because he doesn't typically do interviews, but he wanted to hop on and share his very unique story. Save Samaritan, I feel a little bit silly calling you that, but I understand why you're doing what you're doing. But how would you personally identify yourself? Like, what's your background and stuff like that, and maybe why you're kind of concealing your identity a little bit more?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me on, Yoel. I watched some of your content. It's pretty good. I like that you have an emphasis on investigating Islam as well, which is something I'm very interested as someone who grew up Muslim in a devout Muslim family. I grew up as a Palestinian, but it was actually here in the United States. I grew up on the West Coast. And most of my life, I was just like any other Muslim and very pro-Palestinian, of course, being from the region. But I guess God had some other plans and helped me begin to see some of the confusion, some of the darkness that I was in. And very recently in my life, I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've both come out of Islam and I've come out of the identity of a Palestinian.
Got you. Wow. Okay, that's going to be something we definitely got to unpack. So
It's pretty
would you
loaded.
say? Yeah, definitely. So, what was your relationship? We'll talk about the Palestinian identity first, and then we can kind of move into Islam. But what was your relationship with the concept of being a Palestinian? Because you say you weren't necessarily born there or grew up there, but you had kind of a shaping, I assume, through culture or how you grew up of what that means. What did that mean to you when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I think what a lot of people in the West probably don't understand is that even though I grew up in the States and I was an American citizen, I wasn't made to feel as an American, not by my American constituents, but by my family, by my community. It was discouraged, I would say, my American identity. If in fact it was encouraged to reject altogether. You're not an American, you're a Palestinian. So I tell people I did have a very strong sense of patriotism for Palestine. My American identity was just not in the picture, not in the equation.
Gotcha. Wow, that's fascinating. And that was something that was explicitly told to you growing up.
Yes, I mean, I remember even when I'd go visit Palestine, my family there would ask me, okay, so بتحب أمريكا ولا بتحب البلاد? Do you like America or do you like it here in your home? And you have to give the right answer. Yeah, I like it here. It's better than America. Or, you'd be told it's صيرش زي الأمريكان. Don't be like the Americans. تعملش زي الأمريكان. Don't act like the Americans. I remember one time one of my aunts came up to me and she told me, أصحى اتجوز بنت أمريكاني. Like, don't you dare marry an American girl. So it was a very common theme to stay away from everything American. The American were these other people, and we were not them.
So how would you rationalize the fact that I assume your parents, they willfully immigrated to America, so they had some sort of a motivation to be there. So how did you and how did your parents rationalize the fact that, hey, we came to America, we willfully immigrated here, yet we hate it here or don't respect the country or don't want to become Americans? How did you reconcile that?
It wasn't really addressed the way they reconciled it as my parents, as this was a temporary thing. We only moved here to America for the opportunities. We needed to send money back home. And out of all the countries, America just seemed the best fitting, but we're going to move back one of these years. And that never happens. They end up raising children, sending their children off to college. And my story isn't unique. This is the story of many many Muslim Americans who immigrated, especially from Palestine. This was more of a temporary thing, and it ends up being permanent because although they may not want to admit it, they really like it here.
Yeah, I mean, compared to Palestine, or like, okay, where are they from? If you don't want to disclose it, it's all good. But what general area are they from of that region?
Yeah,
Would you say?
they're in the Judea Samaria area, specifically in the Ramallah province. I won't give away the town because it's such a small world that
Yeah. No, I got.
yeah. But within the Ramallah province, one of the towns there,
That's right.
that's where my parents grew up. That's where a lot of my family still resides. I have a lot of family here in the States and other countries as well. But I would say about half of my family, and it's a very large family, still reside in Judea Samaria.
Okay, so that's right here. That's what they like to call the West Bank, to erase any sort of history from it.
Hmm.
Okay, so speaking of which, was that the intention? Would you say, when people say, because I feel like people know their history, they know that is Judea and Samaria, but I mean that was a later invention when they started calling it West Bank.
Yeah,
Was
in
that ever
Arabic
discussed?
it's called al-Diffa, al-Diffa al-Gharbiyya, which means like the West Bank, and that was just invented by the Jordanians when they had annexed that area from 1948 to 67, and it was during that time that they named it the West Bank because it was west of the Jordan River.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So, what was your perception growing up of Americans, but specifically Jewish Americans, and even we can talk about Israelis a little bit later?
My perception of Americans was conflicting as well. One, I saw them as people who were morally bankrupt, for one, because that's what I was told to see them as. I remember anytime I would have American friends, or my dad would pick me up from school or something, and he'd see me walk to the car with someone who was obviously not Muslim looking. He would give me a little talk as to why are you making friends with these Americans? And I remember not being allowed to go to certain field trips or things because if I couldn't find a Muslim friend to go with, I wasn't really allowed to go. And that was more in later on in my high school years. I think it was less of an issue growing up in elementary and middle school, but with the issue of co-ed students, and that being a big issue to Muslim families, having boys and girls going to the same school. To play it safe, they encouraged their Muslim children to stay around Muslim friends who understood that dynamic of staying within your own gender communities, whether you're a girl or you're a boy. So yes, my view of Americans was heavily influenced by that. I told myself, okay, I guess I need to see these Americans as being morally bankrupt, and maybe I need to see out of sympathy that I need to help these people.
I mean, I would say try to be as objective as I can. I mean, you have sometimes Christians, they want to hang around, have their kids hang around primarily Christians. You have Jews, they want to have their kids hang out primarily around Jews. It's not that crazy. But where did you see it go to that next level where it's like, don't be around these people at all. We're better than them. They're not good people. Like, what was the language used?
It was always in a negative connotation. That's where it was. It wasn't framed in a sense that, hey, this isn't about us being better than them or not. It's just, I'd like you to have familiarity with our own culture and our own language. If it stopped there, like you're saying, I wouldn't find an issue with it. Where it became an issue is where it was obvious that it was out of hatred and bigotry, especially towards the Jewish people. And it did include Americans and Westerners in general being always used in this negative connotation. but it became even more severe with the Jewish people.
Okay, guys, we ran into a little bit of like camera lighting issues, but we are back. My question is, what was your perception growing up of Jewish people? Obviously, this is very relevant considering the conflict between, the Arabs of the region and the Jewish people of the region.
Yeah, man. And I want to preface this by just making sure people understand that I don't hold these viewpoints anymore, because I want to be as candid as I can, and I don't want people to be offended when I say these things, because it is pretty bigoted the way I thought of Jewish people. I fit the bill of what every anti-Semite, of what you think of an anti-Semite. I might have not been raging in public about it. I would probably better expressed as a functioning anti-Semite. But growing up, Jewish people were never framed in a positive light for me, ever. It was always, I remember the first time I was told about Jewish people, the way my father explained them is that they were cowards. That was the first adjective, the first descriptor of what a Jewish person is, was that they're cowards. The second descriptor that was given to me was that they're pigs, and that they're descendants of pigs and rats. And they use I forget which verse it is, but there's a surah, a verse in a surah in the Quran that speaks about how how Allah, I don't even want to attribute that to God, but how Allah, the Muslim God, transformed the Jewish people into pigs and rats because they didn't obey the Sabbath. And my father and a few of the imams that I grew up with would use that verse as a way to say that Jewish people are descendants of pigs and rats. And so I remember distinctively the first time I saw a Jewish person. I was in a grocery store's parking lot with a member of my family. And that family member pointed to someone maybe a few lanes down in the parking lot and said, "That man looks Jewish." And it was said in a way that I had to look and see what was going on. And sure enough, there was a man with the Jewish hat. And I remember, and you got to understand that I was maybe 9, 10 years old at this age. I'm a young kid. I shouldn't be thinking these things, but I did. I looked at that man and I thought to myself, what is this vile person doing in our neighborhood? Who would allow such a creature in our neighborhood? And I know that that's hard for people to hear, but I think people need to understand that very much is the indoctrination that I was in.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to find the verse because it does say the Jews and Christians are apes and pigs in the, I think that's in the Quran, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
Not even in the Hadiths. Yeah, so it's not even, they're like, oh, a lot of them, they say, oh, the Hadiths, it's like, no, the Quran. It's like, no, the Quran says the Jews and Christians are pigs and monkeys. But
it might have not been rats. It might have been monkeys. Either way,
yeah.
It's not any better.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the ballpark anyway. I mean, it's not like the point is proven. I mean, at that point,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That makes sense, predicated on the things that are said in Islam. That, I mean, I don't know. I assume most people watching this, if they follow my content, will already be familiar with. But what was your relationship with Islam growing up? Speaking of which,
just like any person with any faith growing up, its ups and downs. I would say the time in my life where my faith in Islam was at its peak was the last couple of years in high school. And that's where I visited the masjid, our local masjid, at least twice a week. That's where I began to delve into Muslim apologetics. And I would watch some of my favorite apologists like Ahmad Didat and Zakir Naik. And that would be the peak of my devoutness in Islam, would be during those years. It was afterwards, during my college years, where that faith began to waver. And I began to, just like many students who enter into college out of Christian homes or Muslim homes, they encounter more of a secular world and are influenced by that. And I was no exception. And I would say that's where my faith began to not so much waver, it just kind of took a backseat. But growing up, I would say, like in my early years, I loved it and hated it. I loved it because, man, the community is great. The close-knit ummah that you feel, whether it's at the masajid or whether it's with your Muslim brothers at the youth programs, or whether it's within the Muslim households in the community that you live in. It's wonderful. Are you kidding me? It's what many people dream of growing up, that they wish that they had this family. So I loved it. At the same time, I struggled with it because it prevented me from being able to live that American life that I did envy from Americans, going to the movies with friends, traveling on my own, even in my adult years, just many things, just being able to, I had to live a double life, I would say. And that's the story of many Muslim Americans in the youth. They end up living these double lives. There's the Muslim self at home that's acceptable to the community. And then there's the self at school, and that is more secret. And I remember saying in one of my videos that I and many other Muslims, we trembled in fear for the day that those two worlds collide. Every time I'd go out with family to a restaurant, I would just be so nervous that I would encounter a friend from school. So you can see that Islam offered both a community and just a wonderful, wonderful traditions, Eid and Ramadan every year, beautiful times. At the same time, though, it created a huge divide in my life that I had to keep separate at all times.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. It was that intense where if you saw somebody, then you would be scared. Yeah, I mean, I would say even from my personal experience with Muslims, even I had one friend of a friend. I mean, we weren't tight, but his parents were from Palestine, and they didn't live. I mean, I guess they were all Muslim. I mean, I didn't meet a single person that was like came from a Muslim family that was like, no, I'm not a Muslim, and we never really talked about it. But they didn't really live a Muslim life. But they also kept a lot of the, hatred of Israel, really extreme hostility for anybody from Israel or Jewish people in general. And that was always fascinating to me. Like they will forego a lot of the aspects that created the hatred, but they will keep the hatred, which is very interesting. Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, you're touching on something that I've been fascinated by as well. Just introspectively looking at my own life, isn't it funny how the common denominator between the more westernized secular Muslim and the more devout religious Muslim is that hatred for Israel. And that, especially for Palestinians, that strong patriotism for Palestine, that regardless of your walk, your Islamic walk, you still have that deep hatred for Israel. And that goes to show just what is being prioritized in these homes. Is it your relationship with God? Is it developing a good moral ground and appeasing the Lord? That is a priority in Muslim homes. But what seems to be a priority more than anything, especially within the Palestinian home, is to always have a extremist stance against Israel. And so even when my faith began to waver, and even because I went through a couple of years of being an atheist, even during those years, I still held hostile views towards Israel and towards Jewish people.
That's fascinating. I don't want to say like what, because you've been saying that you've recently been introspective about it. Why do you I think my hypothesis is, there's like Sunni, Shia, there's this country, Muslim, this country, like at least there's like this one thing that ties all Muslims together. I assume that this is just an easy tribal topic that everybody can get on the same page about, no matter where you're from, no matter what denomination you're from, X, Y, and Z. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I attribute that to the fact that one, Muhammad, who every Muslim reveres and models their life around, both in way of thinking and in their behavior and in their acts. Muhammad held a very hostile view towards Jewish people, especially in his closing years in his prophethood. He, on his deathbed, was cursing the Jews and the Christians. And in Hadith, as well as in the Quran, we read about the Jewish people and their role in relationship to the Muslim Ummah in the last days, or so to speak, or on the Day of Judgment. And we read about the Dajjal, and we see that this Dajjal, or the Antichrist, is a figure who is a strong enemy of Allah, And the one faith that's going to be siding with the Dajjal are the Jewish people. In fact, the Dajjal is going to have a military of 70,000 soldiers who are Jewish people in the hadiths. And so what you see, what you gather after you put all that together, and I believe in the Quran as well, I believe in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 81 or 82, it speaks on both the Jewish people and the Christian people. And in regards to the Jewish people, it says that you will find that those who are the most hostile, vehemently hostile towards Allah, are the Jews. So a Muslim is looking at this, they're saying, okay, so the Jewish people are the most hostile against my Lord and against my
The
prophet.
greatest, I believe the wording is greatest enmity towards the believer is the Jew. I believe that that's the wordage. I think
Some translation translate it as vehemently or
vehemently. Okay.
hostile or violent even. But yeah, either way, what is being, the principle that is being explained there is that the Jewish people are the enemy of Allah. And so as the enemy of Allah, the Muslim people are to be stern against them. And the ones who the Muslims should be the most stern against are the Jewish people, because they are the most stern against Allah. And so you put this all together, that the Jewish people are the most hostile against Allah and His Prophet, that in the end days, they're going to side with the Dajjal. And then you add in the hadith where the day of judgment, meaning the day that salvation is going to be finally given to the Muslims, that day is not going to come unless the Muslims fight the Jews until there's so very few of them that they're going to be hiding behind trees and rocks, and the trees and rocks will be crying out saying, hey Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. You put this all together, and it doesn't matter what walk of Islam you live in, you're always going to have that hostile view towards the Jewish community.
Yeah. And that verse, I mean, I have that one memorized too. And it's funny, that's in a Sahih hadith. It's like, I think there's no Muslim that can deny that verse. And how often or how common was that verse talked about or known in the Muslim community? I don't know. I'm not in the Muslim
That
community.
hadith was taught to me as young. I believe I was like 6 or 7 years old.
Wow.
So it's a common hadith. It's not some fringe. I don't want people to get the idea that this is some kind of hadith that is in some hadith book collecting dust on a shelf somewhere. This hadith has been presented to me as a Muslim many times from the young age of 6 or 7, all the way up until more recently in my life. In fact, I don't know if people know this, but shortly after October 7th, and this goes to show how the PA is not really much different to Hamas. Shortly after October 7th, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, instructed the masajid in the West Bank to deliver sermons based on that hadith. So imagine that, just weeks after the October 7th attacks, where the Hamas and Gazan civilians invaded and murdered and raped and the most atrocious things against innocent people, the PA, as a response, is instructing the masajid to teach sermons on that hadith to their constituents.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and I had known at that point a decent amount about Islam, like enough to know that particular verse, and that really hit home where I was like, oh dang, like even the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority is, I mean I knew even before that they weren't moderate, obviously. They were still doing the pay to slay program and just their rhetoric, but they just have more of a slick vibe to them because I believe Mahmoud Abbas was trained by communists, so he has a little bit of that, we're just here for peace, but a little bit more sophisticated way of maneuvering. But it's crazy. Okay, so I guess when did you start questioning your faith, and then how did that transition happen to you ending up to leaving your faith? I don't even know if it's necessarily a faith, but I guess you can answer that too.
Well, is your question in regards to my faith in Islam, or is your question in regards to my patriotism with Palestine?
Okay, you can, let's speak on your patriotism towards Palestine, and then you can talk about Islam.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. So I would say where my where my loyalties to Palestine began to waver was about several years ago. I had traveled to Palestine and actually lived there for a little under a year. I wanted to live among my people, all my life. I visited my family many times growing up in the West Bank, in Judea, Samaria. But I never lived there for a long period. And I wanted that. I wanted to be enveloped in my culture that I so proudly wore on my as bracelets, as a flag on my wall, as wearing my kafiyah. I didn't want to be just an American. I wanted to really embrace the Palestinian identity. And so I went and lived there for about a year among my family. And I knew going in that there were already things that I was going to disagree with, because by then I would say that my views towards Israel weren't so much moderate. It was just more of this apathetic kind of feel to it. It wasn't part of my identity anymore to be so vocal. So I knew going in that I wasn't going to agree with everything that I saw, and I thought that was going to be okay. But I quickly realized that no, in fact, it's going to shake me to my core. I remember around the year 2018, 2019, there was one of many attacks in Israel proper by people from our side, from Judea and Samaria. And this man had gone in, he took a knife, stabbed a soldier, took the soldier's firearm, and then opened fire on a bus, just mowing anyone he can see. And I see that, and I clearly don't condone that.
Maybe. And by the way, I want to say that I would pull it up, but this type of stuff happens so often that I don't even know if SEO-wise I can even find it.
Exactly.
But again, one of the key points that I want to point out, though, is the fact that you were there. So you're experiencing and hearing news that in the West you never hear.
The helicopters were flying over our town trying to find the guy. That's how close to home this was. And so this man just committed a horrible thing. I don't know how many were killed. I hope it was as minimal as can be. But that was a turning point for me. The smile on people's faces in my town made me sick. The way they celebrated it, the way they boasted how they're never going to find him. We know what village he's from, and they're doing a good job hiding him. And the murals that started popping up shortly after they did find him, just celebrating this man, and the way people justified it as resistance, as he's a mujahid, a holy warrior. I couldn't stand with it. Now, maybe if you spoke to me 15, 20 years ago, I probably would have agreed. I would have agreed. I would have told you, yeah, no, he did a good thing. But the Lord took me by that time through many transformative years. And I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful that he gave me that discernment to understand that this was a vile and evil thing. And I'm very thankful that the Lord gave me that discernment to understand that it's very vile and evil that my people, that my family are celebrating it and encouraging it.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit, because I want to go from you kind of were saying, this is weird, I can't believe they're supporting this. And you had the presence of mind at that point to know that this is not something to be celebrated, let alone endorsed or condoned. So how did that transition you into, because you kind of jumped ahead, but how did that work in you as the time went on? You want to kind of lean into that and double click on that?
Okay. Yeah. I would say it was, funny enough, in Palestine, I wasn't really given the freedom to explore that. And so I ended up having to take a back burner. Anytime that I would express anything that remotely seemed like I was having more moderate views towards Israel, it was quickly shut down. I was even subjected to blackmail and threatened if I continued to do so. And so while I was in Palestine, it was actually very difficult to explore, to further explore that. I mean, you're talking to someone who, while I was there, I was hanging out with my cousins and my cousins' friends, right? And these kids who are in their teen years, and even adults, 19, 20, 21, are telling me how Hitler was a good man. And they have a poster of Hitler on their wall. And my uncle telling me that اليهود يعني بدكين يبدوا مشاكل في رومانيا. The Jews, they were just causing these problems in Germany, and so Hitler had to do whatever Hitler had to do, and that's how it was being explained. And I can't say anything back. I remember simply joking. I was harvesting olives with my family, and I see a Jewish family from a nearby settlement, because we were that close where the olive trees were. I see a Jewish family walking down, and I jokingly say to them, "Hey, in salam alayhum," meaning like, should we go and give them peace, like say salam to them? And the joke went over everyone's head. My uncle specifically was very upset and threatened that if I continued saying these things, that he and my other uncles would kick me out of Palestine. So I'm sorry that I'm elaborating on this. I just want you to understand that.
No. This is what I wanted.
Yeah,
This is very interesting. I don't know. I have no idea.
So I would say this, now that I'm saying it out loud, another point comes to mind is that myself, but I'm also wondering for any other Palestinian that may have moderate views, they're not given the freedoms and the room and the resources to explore that. It wasn't until finally I left, I finally would just kind of had it with living in Palestine. And I was aware that it wasn't the Israelis that was oppressing me. I was oppressed by my own people to the point where I couldn't freely speak. I had my camera equipment confiscated because I was pointing it at a protest in Ramallah. And the officers quickly came and confiscated my camera. And I'm just a bystander. I'm not a journalist, nothing. I just saw a protest and figured I'd take a little video of it. And I don't know, they went and arrested the protester. I don't know what she was protesting about, but they quickly detained her and took her. And I remember my cousin saying, like, she's gonna, it's an Arabic idiom meaning like she's gonna eat air. Like she's about to get it in prison for what she did. And well, that's where the oppression was coming from. And so I finally got out of there. And it wasn't after I got out, it was the following years where I began to be able to explore this new paradigm shift that I had been experiencing.
Interesting. And you mentioned at that point, you weren't necessarily that militant in respects to Islam. But did your experience there, maybe you were catching a lot of heat with your family, but did you still have the mentality of like, okay, the Jewish people are this, that, they deserve it? Like, were you kind of shifted all the way where it was like, I don't really care about these dark Islamic passages? Like, how were you experiencing that in your head?
It was around that time that I had more, you got to remember, I grew up on the West Coast. And in the West Coast, it's a very liberal mindset and your truth, my truth kind of thinking, not objective truth, but more subjective truth. And so I'm looking at all this and saying, well, that's just their truth. But I think my truth is the better truth. I just think that they're misinterpreting these Islamic passages. And so that's kind of how I would view these things. But I wasn't all the way to where I am now. I just had more of a moderate view, kind of an indifferent view, kind of a view that I want to approach peace. I would say even that I wanted to figure out how to approach peace with Jewish people. Sorry. I wanted to figure out how to approach peace with Jewish people around then. But it wasn't to the extent of where I am now, because again, it took a couple years for me to explore that.
Okay. So I guess that makes sense. I mean, you were Martin Luther, kind of breaking things apart. As far as Islam, it seemed like kind of interpreting things or kind of trying to see it your own way. But actually, I think that this is a very common perception, especially like when I see these clips of debates of people, of like these Muslim kids that are in college that have conversations and debate people that are like, debating them on Islam. And they're saying, no, this passage says this. And they say, no, that was for a point in time. Mm-hmm. No, that, that's just history. No. So I actually think your interpretation or how you mentally went about Islam is very common in America. Now, is it Islamic? That's a whole nother conversation. I don't think anybody would think that, but I think it's very common. That's why am always hesitant to say Muslims this, Muslims that, and attribute all of the Islamic teachings to all Muslims, because people do have a different perception of what each verse says and how much weight to put behind it. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. People in the West need to understand that we're in a very unprecedented time for the Islamic world. The way you see Islam now as being, I mean, recently you could argue it's probably not looking like this, but the way you see Islam now as kind of being subdued and not in control without a caliphate, this is very unprecedented. This isn't how Islam was during the first 1,300 years of its life. During the first 1,300 years, there was always a caliphate. It was a very strong imperialist nation that conquered all the surrounding territories and subjugated all its civilians under Islam, whether it was under a dhimmi status or whether it was as a Muslim. And that's how it was. It wasn't until the Ottoman Empire fell during World War I that we entered in a new age of Islam, which is one that is scattered, not unified, and one without a caliphate. And the Muslims are aware of that. And that's why you see many organizations, tea organizations, coming together, trying to reinstitute that. They're trying to bring back the golden age of the Ummah. And so what you see here in the West from your Muslim neighbor, although these Muslim neighbors are, I would say many of them, I would say the majority of them are very good people. And they do want to assimilate into Western culture and they want to adopt Western values. You need to understand that when Muslims begin to become a majority in a certain area and begin to dominate and have real influence in the politics and their surrounding community, it doesn't look like how your moderate Muslim neighbor is practicing. It looks very much like what we're seeing in the UK. It looks very much like what we're seeing in Dearborn. And it looks very much like what we see in the Muslim world at large, in Egypt and Syria. That's how Islam is. It's more of a imperialistic, dominating political force, guised as a religion, or maybe better explained as a theocracy of sorts, joining jurisprudence and religion together as the governing power over the region. That's what true Islam is. That's what Muhammad was called to do, and that's what Muhammad called his companions to continue to do after his death.
Yeah, I think, there's multiple things that popped out. First of all, I said Somalia, I meant Minnesota, because a lot of the similar things are happening.
I didn't catch that.
It kind of is Somalia at this point. But what's kind of fascinating about that is it's really hard to explain. You mentioned Europe. People don't pay attention to news outside of America usually, but it's really hard to pin this thing down because you do have genuinely kind people that identify as Muslims. But then you have to say, is that worth the import of people that identify with that religion if once they get majority or there's a small percentage of them that do undermine the government? That's a risk personally I'm not willing to make. If they can prove they're being persecuted and we have some sort of asylum situation, we can have that conversation. But in mass, I don't see it. It doesn't make sense to me. And after the abuse of the southern border, definitely not. But I always think about, you mentioned it's a religion or it's a kind of like a theocracy or a nation that's disguised as a religion. And what's interesting to me, when the founding fathers came into writing the Constitution, what was their opinion about Islam? I always think about that because with law, you have to think about what their mentality was at that particular point in time, at least certain interpretations of law and how you study law. And I always think about what was and they looked very negatively towards Islam in our first military battle, as the United States was against Islam in the Barbary Wars. But again, this is what's very interesting. What can we do to kind of deal with this situation is kind of an open loop question. I'll ask you towards the end. But first, before we do that, I want to ask you how you actually ended up leaving. What convinced you? And then what ended up, spoiler alert, bringing you to become a Christian?
Yeah, it started with having a friend who I knew had my best intentions. She's now my wife, and at the time, she was a very good friend that needed to put me to the fire, so to speak. And the way she did that is she saw that I was struggling with grappling all of this, right? And having a bit of an identity crisis. And she saw that the way I was approaching it was just not correct. I was more emotional about how I would discern truth. And she had to tell me one day that you need to quit that. That's not how you seek truth. The way you seek truth is by looking at primary sources, by looking at the context, by looking at history. You put your emotions aside. If you're offended, that doesn't equate false. That's not how, and that's very much how I was operating.
Do you think
And
that's common in Islam?
Very, very common. Pull up any debate, so to speak, between a Muslim and a Christian, especially the more common Muslim approaching the conversation. I'm not really talking about the da'i, but that's who we are speaking about, correct? We're speaking about the common Muslim. The common Muslim, when you see them come up on these, whether it be a TikTok live debate or whether it be on YouTube with someone like Avery from God Logic, it's a very emotional mindset, and it's just more of, well, this is how I was taught all my life, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to elaborate. I don't need to investigate. And in fact, the very fact that you're trying to question my beliefs, I see it as an attack on me personally. And so it is very common. And I think that's just ingrained in the faith. You see, you hear about mubahalas, where the Muslims, if they have this disagreement, the way they settle it is just by having this duel, so to speak, mubahala, where they're just cursing one another and cursing themselves, and whoever's right, may the curses that I cast on myself become true. And it's this very emotional outburst instead of a real reasoning. Whereas, like in our Bible, in the words of our Lord, one of my favorite verses is Proverbs 18:17, and it reads, "The first one to plead his case seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him." So the principle here is that, yeah, you're told one thing, and it may seem so convincing and correct. It can't be any other way until the neighbor comes and examines him. So until you get a second opinion. I mean, my goodness, just that one verse, if I had operated my life in that sense, that would have had a huge impact in a positive way on my life, where I would have been able to better discern truth. I mean, the amount of undoing, the work in undoing all of this is really an undertaking. I'm having to buy all these books and unlearn history because it was a false history. During the first couple of years before I became a Christian, I had to unlearn who I was taught God was and relearn who he really was, because I didn't take that single principle, which is, yeah, I was taught this one way, but let me go ahead and get a second opinion or have someone else examine that and see and kind of contrast these ideas to really see what the truth is. And sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but to try
that's
to
good. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, to try to loop it back, that's where it all started, and it started with me watching the testimony of Nabil Qureshi. I don't know if you know who he is.
Of course.
But Nabil Qureshi, I was shown his testimony by my now wife, and I thought it was a very powerful testimony, even as someone who was still very interested in becoming Muslim again, because it was at this time that I had gone through my atheist years, and I found that it didn't serve me anything. And I wanted to go back to becoming a Muslim to kind of regain that Ummah community that I had been so deprived of. But yeah, Nabil Qureshi gave this powerful testimony. And I remember after he gave his testimony, the chairman, which I believe was Lee Strobel, the author of The Case for Christ, he kind of gave him a line of questioning. And one of the questions to Nabil was, so after all your studying, Nabil, would you say that Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of violence? That was more or less the question that Lee Strobel gave to Nabil Qureshi. And Nabil Qureshi, he was very cordial in his answer, but also very blunt. and he said something along the lines of, when you look into the history of Islam and its founding documents, you have to come to the conclusion that Islam is a violent religion. And I remember having a very visceral reaction to that. I was pretty upset. I mean, up to that point, I thought the testimony was cool. He seemed like an intelligent man, and if he came to the conclusion that Islam is false and Christianity is true, well, then that's between him and God. But it wasn't until that he answered that question that actually caused a reaction out of me. And it was shortly after that we were then introduced to his friend David Wood, David Wood was the man who helped Nabil Qureshi on this walk of discovering the truth about Islam and Christianity. And if you know anything about David Wood, if I was offended by Nabil Qureshi, man, I was in for it when I went to David Wood's channel. And I immediately, I turned to my wife and I said, I don't like this. I don't like this one bit. He's rude. He's cynical. He's probably being paid to say this.
But the Zionist?
Yeah, he's probably some Zionist being paid, and he's not seeking truth. He's just doing this just out of his hate and bigotry towards Islam. I was very upset, and I said, we're not watching this anymore. Shut that off. It was then that she had the talk with me, and she said, this isn't how you're supposed to discern truth. The way you discern truth is by looking at the sources. Look, David Wood is providing all the sources right there. It may very well be true what you're saying, that he's just some bigot that's being paid to say this. But until you actually look at the resources and the sources he's providing and prove them to be false, you can't go out and say that. And so it was kind of a call out. And I needed to hear that from someone who I knew cared for me and wasn't just saying that to cause a reaction out of me. And so I did. And for the first time in my life, I began to examine Islam objectively. And within 24 hours, all of Islam crumbled. That's how quickly it took. When you see a Muslim so hesitant, so scared to approach it, they may not know it, but as soon as they, for the first time, objectively examine Islam, Islam is done for. It's going to take no more than a day for it to completely crumble in front of their face.
And by the way, this is something that I posted. I think you responded to it, actually. I said, and people thought I was crazy. I actually do believe that is, first of all, I think that that's the best thing for Muslims, is that they leave Islam, specifically become Christians. I think that is the best path for them, obviously selfishly. But I think that is actually the easiest way to resolve, even people that are not really theologically interested, to resolve this issue of the Islamic conquest or just tea attacks or any sort of negative consequences of Islam's spread. So I'm glad that you're saying that, because I do feel like it's just there for the pickings. And I think I made a bold prediction that in my lifetime I will see Islam essentially be history. Like, people will be like, oh, there was a point where people were Muslims. I know that's audacious, but I honestly think they think the opposite. They think by in 50 years Islam's going to take over the whole world. But I don't know. People got internet accesses, and I don't know. I wouldn't be so. What do you think about that? You think I'm being a little too much bravado there?
God willing, I pray that the Lord answers your prayers, man. That within our lifetime we can see the fall of one of the biggest satanic religions out there.
By the way, this is David Wood. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to. This is the guy right here. He's wearing a checkmate Jihadis. I don't want to say the J word, but he's essentially writing the Quran on his shirt. Like, this is the type of theatrics you're going to get from David Wood. So that's why when he was like, yeah, if I thought Nabil was going to get under my skin, then David Wood. And it makes sense. I mean, if you're a Muslim seeing this guy and you haven't even seen him talk yet, he's a bit, and he doesn't really hold back by any means. He was,
no, he does not.
He did some bad things in his life. So he's got some, some things that he did were bad that, God is making for good, which is good.
Oh, it just ends up bringing more glory to God to see where he was and where he is now. It is truly a miracle. I want to quickly comment on what you said about David Wood being very unapologetic and without any restraints. to the West, to the Christians in the West, they're going to see that and see it as being not Christ-like, right? And I understand where they're coming from, right? All their life, they're taught that Christ was this very loving figure, and he was. But he did have his moments of, I don't want to call them outbursts, but he did have his moments where he was very candid about what he thought, specifically towards the Pharisees and the religious leaders at the time. But that aside,
even his own apostles.
oh yeah,
Was it Peter? Peter? He said, "Get behind me, Satan."
Could you imagine your Lord and Savior calling you the devil? Are we going to say that's not very Christ-like, Jesus?
No.
You know, but to make a comment on that, people in the West need to understand that the culture in the East is not like how it is here. Over here in America, diplomacy, a bit of grace and kindness in the way you talk to people goes a very long way. It can allow two people who have conflicting beliefs to kind of come to a common understanding. In the East, kindness, meekness is seen as weak, just to put it bluntly. It's seen as weak. In fact, when a Muslim is seeing a Christian in a debate, they're going to say that the Muslim won. And one of the reasons that they're going to say that is because the Muslim was very expressive and was very passionate in the way he spoke and had no reservations or restraints in the way he spoke. He may even throw out a couple insults, and that was good. That just shows that he really believes what he believes. However, the Christian, who's all meek and kind and soft-voiced, he doesn't really believe what he's saying. Look how meek and small he looks. That's how Muslims in the East see it. That's how even, first, second generation Muslims here in America may see it. That's how I saw it. Growing up in America, it wasn't the people on the street corners giving me a little pamphlet and saying, "Do you know your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?" and knocking on my door sweetly. That did nothing for me. Or even, I don't want to say or even worse, but or even less effective, the Christians say, well, just by my way of living will be enough. They'll see Christ through my actions. That may work for certain communities, but for the Muslims, and I'm saying this from experience, it was people like David Wood who really had to push me, that really gave me that shove to have to examine what he's saying and put me to the fire, so to speak. And so I just want people here in the West, Christians especially, to kind of keep that in your mind, that although David Wood seems like he's having a lot of fun doing what he's doing when he's putting on these shirts with the Quran all over, or he's eating the Quran, I don't condone all these things, but you have to understand it's coming from a place because he knows the mindset of a Muslim very well, and it works. You should see the comment section under his videos. Thousands, and I mean tens of thousands, if you add them all together, of Muslims thanking David Wood and others like within that circle for their work. And that has to be a testimony for something.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, just to give my perspective so people know, I grew up where we had, I'm in a very rare group. I think there's like 30,000 in Israel of Jews who believe in Jesus, which is like very, very small community where like everybody knows each other, but it's like multi-generational. But my dad is not Christian. My mom is Jewish ethnically. So I always was able to look at things from like, I guess, an objective perspective, in the sense of like having exposure to both cultures. So I could always kind of pick and choose, I guess. In that sense, I mean, there was obviously the world open to me. I mainly grew up in America, but I can't even imagine kind of being in a world where like both your parents, your whole family, your uncles, they're all kind of like, not only are you going to be within our culture and we're forcing it, we're not going to give you the opportunity to look at any other alternative, like just at least be like, even for me, if I raise my kids as believing in Jesus, having their faith in Jesus, I'm still going to be like, you want to explore that? Go for it. Like, I got nothing to hide. I'm not going to like keep you from, all of these things. But also I wanted to pull up this, you're talking about how Jesus was, all peace and stuff. Now, whoever he told them, the one with a purse should take it, and likewise a bag, and the one without a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors. For what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. So they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. I love how they like just addressed the sword part. They're like, yeah, nice. He's telling us to get a sword. And then he said, that is enough. So like, even here, I mean, people never bring up this verse. It's all about, no, Jesus was a pacifist. It's like, no, it's like not to like go out and unalive people. Obviously there's nowhere in the, in his gospel to say that, but you should always defend yourself. You should always be strong and protect your, whatever it may be. So it's just funny what people like to leave out and what people like to kind of include with their perception of Christianity or whatnot, but it is what it is, man. But anything you want to wrap up with? I think we're reaching that time, and my battery's about to run out. But
yeah, I'd say one of my favorite passages in the Bible. I think I mentioned this. If you go to my Instagram page or my TikTok page, I have a pin on the top, guiding principles. And it's Proverbs chapter 18 that I chose. I love the whole book of Proverbs, but I make the argument that if you want a manual to how to discern truth, I would argue that it's Proverbs 18. I would really take the time and read through it. And just have in mind where the world is now. And you're going to be reading things in there and you're going to be like, yep, that's very fitting to today's world. I would say I pray that people can come to have biblical guiding principles in their lives. I can't stress enough how much I wish I had the Bible in my hands to be able to help me navigate life. I keep reading things within Scripture that, wow, if I just applied it in my life, I probably would be much farther ahead than where I am now. And I would hope that I could give that fair warning, that fair bit of advice to others to do the same, and to use the Lord as your North Star, to use Scripture as your founding principles and your founding documents, and to help guide that in your life. People are always amazed at how someone like myself came out of the background that I was from into where I am now, and I always owe it to the Lord. I can't stress it enough. I would not be here if it wasn't for those who prayed for me, and if it wasn't for the Scripture that I have so available to me right here.
Love it. And yeah, you mentioned you just started a YouTube channel, and I think you're going to be posting more stuff on there.
If people want to find me, they can find me as the Saved Samaritan on all social platforms, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube. And I've been posting more regularly on Instagram and TikTok, but per the requests of many people, they're really seeking more longer form content. And so I do want to provide that. And I hope to be posting more long form content on YouTube soon.
Cool, man. Well, appreciate you. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure you subscribe to the Saved Samaritan